doing a little bit of a theme, starting a theme show of sorts. I want to really start addressing some questions that have been coming up, and these I think I'll put actually just put a caveat in here. Anyone that would like to ask any questions, you're welcome to post below. Just put it in the comments, and I'll definitely address. Well, my goal is to address all of them. When I go to address a question, really, I want to do the best I can to do the research. If I don't know the answers, I'm certainly going to dig deep and find them. I'll also share my opinion based on logic and my sort of rational approach to thinking through things. And yeah, we'll have a great discussion. So today, you'll see the comment above. I've been getting lots of questions on this Orange Theory training, or Orange Theory Studios. They've been popping up. There's now one in Ottawa. And it's a brand out of Florida. And the questions I've been getting is, what do you think about this approach to training? What are your, just generally, what are your thoughts? And so I thought I'd jump into this topic. I will say I have not trained there, so I'm not going to comment specifically about Orange Theory or the location here in Ottawa. What I'm going to talk about more so is really the approach that they use, and I'll give you some context for for how you can think about this approach, so that if you do choose to train there, you can do it in the full knowledge of both the benefits and the risks. So for those of you maybe living under a rock, or perhaps you're not as up to date on all the ins and outs of the training scene here, Orange Theory and things like that, what they rely on, and it's actually they do a really good job of focusing on cardiovascular training. So really the emphasis is placed on really getting the heart rate up, stressing the body to the point of I think if you were to summarize their claims, it's like you're going to sweat at every class, and you're going to work really hard, which is great. There's definitely some benefits there. And the other really unique thing I wanted to comment on about Orange Theory, just before I go to more general, is they're really embracing technology, and I think that's really cool. They have some unique applications of technology, adding in a bit of competition amongst the members of the class, where you can see each other's performance. I think there's pros and cons to that, but for those that are really into the competitive nature of training, then that can be a really good fit. The benefits that are claimed by gyms that do apply this, I'm going to label it as chronic cardio. So chronic cardio meaning that you're expected to maintain at least within the zone, the cardio zone. You remember that on the old treadmills, they had always listed that cardio zone based on your heart rate, and usually it's somewhere between like 50 to 70%. For moderate activity, and then 70 to 80% for getting more intense, and 80 to 100 when you want to go extreme. And so their emphasis, and gyms like this, are really based on getting you into the zone, and then training based on different levels or different degrees of that cardiovascular stress zone, I guess you can think about it. And so I actually consider that what we call chronic cardio, because you're expected to maintain that level of activity for an extended period of time. Usually the classes are about an hour long. Lots of people do this at a steady state. So you can think of also in the similar category would be running, cycling for longer distances, really anything beyond, I would argue beyond the 30-minute mark. Some people extend that a little bit, 45 minutes. And so the benefits that are claimed are that, it's a great way to train. You get a really, like I mentioned, you burn a lot of calories. So they're certainly marketing to anyone that's looking to lose weight. And they're also claiming that you build strength, you build endurance, and of course, you build your cardiovascular resilience. Meaning that you have a, quote unquote, a stronger cardiovascular system. And I'm not going to take anything away from those those listed benefits. I think there are some major caveats to be made, which is the case that I'm going to build for you now. So when we look at this approach to training, we really have to take a step back. And like those of you who know how we approach things at the Wellness Group and within the larger community of Life by Design, we're always going back to first principles. And one of the most important principles when you're considering anything to do with your health is we really need to look at it through an evolutionary lens. We need to consider it based on what are we actually designed for, and by that I mean, what have we had to do for the bulk of our the history of our species, which really extends back about roughly 2 million years, and certainly over the last couple 100,000 years. That's really the context that we need to consider when we think of things that move us toward or away from health. When it comes to exercise, I really want to, for a moment, I want you to kind of ditch that word, or at least put it aside, and consider really what are we doing? What's the intention when we are moving? And movement simply is something that we need to do to survive. If you think about the real underlying purpose of movement, at its roots, it's survival. Movement is one of our main strategies for meeting all the other requirements that we have to be healthy, really, to survive. And when you think of back in a day, let's go back 30,000 years. So we're hunter-gatherers, we're living in a small tribe somewhere, and life is pretty tough. But when we look at the types of movement that they had to do simply to survive, it really involved a variety of different types of movement. We talk about things like crawling, climbing, jumping, throwing, pulling, lifting heavy stuff, carrying it long distances, tons and tons of low-level activity. So walking, somewhere in the range of like 10 to 15 miles a day. Movement simply was really a super important strategy for survival. And because we had to do that for so long, you just really can't, it's hard to conceptualize, but hundreds of thousands of years spent in that very similar lifestyle, our body has become super well adapted to those demands. Now, if you were to go back and consider what it would have taken to cause one of those, an early human, what it would have taken for them to, say, run at a steady pace for 90 minutes. There's very few reasons why they would have had to do that. Probably the most consistent reason would have been some reason for survival. So maybe evading a prey of some sort. Perhaps it would have been to, maybe that prey was another tribe itself, some other humans. Maybe it was to get away from some other life-threatening event like a fire or a flood. The point is that it would have only been done in the context of extreme stress. So when we fast forward and we think of, choosing to recreate that kind of activity, it really does. It's very tightly paired with our stress response. Now, all exercise does create stress in the body, and we can leverage that by really keeping it really short and intense, so that our body can actually adapt to the stress, recover, and then have the ability to adapt at a greater capacity the next time you're exposed to the same stress. That's really the whole intention behind our modern day training, right? Because we don't have the main, I guess the outside motivation to have to do all that kind of movement we were talking about before, because we largely live in a very convenient society. We live in a life of convenience where we hop in our car to get from point A to point B. We have escalators to get us up and down the stairs. We've got all manner of convenience when it comes to finding food. We don't have to go out and hunt our food anymore. We even have, to a large degree, we've eliminated any requirement for doing any heavy lifting. We've even got to the point of making that, almost has a negative connotation, simply because it's dangerous. So we've moved so far away from satisfying these core requirements, the things that our body is just, we can't avoid the fact that it's well adapted to doing those kinds of movements that our ancestors did. And if we want to be healthy, we really need to emulate those movements consistently and those types of stressors consistently in order to express the greatest health. So if we come back to this question about, what do I think about this chronic cardio approach to training? Really, my position is that it has a net negative effect. Great, it gets you out and moving. Maybe there's some accountability aspects to it. There's some motivation aspects to it. And for someone who's going to choose either do nothing or do chronic cardio, perhaps there's an argument to be made that the chronic cardio is beneficial. But I look at it as probably the biggest risk there is the opportunity cost of what else you could be doing in that time. But I actually put together a list of 5 things that I just would ask you to consider if you're engaging in things chronic cardio, this kind of high intensity over a long period of time, or kind of moderate to high intensity over extended periods of time. And so I've got 5 things here. I'm just going to read off my list. The first thing is kind of something I've already talked about. So chronic cardio, it leads to chronic stress. Stress is actually, chronic stress sits at the root of a lot of our modern day ailments. It drives chronic stress actually in the body. That stress response actually inhibits a lot of really important mechanisms in the body for healing and repair. And it also drives a lot of mechanisms in the body that are all about kind of short-term over long-term. And the whole purpose of the stress response is for survival. And so if we're constantly, our lives are already stressful, and so our stress response is active quite a lot, way more than it would have been evolutionarily. And because of that, if we go out and do a type of exercise that is also driving a chronic stress response, then we're really just adding fuel to the fire. And really, I think that can contribute even, in a significant way to the development of chronic injuries, chronic health problems in general. The second thing is often they require repetitive movements. So, if you think of the context of maybe doing an activity, same activity over a long period of time, like cycling or running, or perhaps in these more classes where there is some variety of movement, but you're often doing the same types of movement every time you go into the gym, then that can lead to overuse injuries, certainly wear and tear on the joints and other tissues of the body. And that's not a good thing. We want to really, I think you want to focus on doing varied types of movements, changing up the stress quite regularly so that you avoid the effects of overuse. Number 3 is actually, this is kind of a paradox. A lot of the claims around this form of training is that it's great for weight loss. What's kind of funny, well, not funny actually, it's a little bit sad, is that there is a net fat storing effect when we do chronic cardio. And that's simply, it's really logical if you think about what happens when we're telling the body, I need to be able to perform at this high rate for a long period of time. That has a serious effect. That just has an effect on your metabolism, where the signals in the body essentially say, okay, we need to have lots more energy stored because we don't know when we're going to get our next source of fuel, and we might have to perform at this high level at the drop of a hat. Seems to be happening a lot. And so what then happens is your body starts to store fuel, and our most efficient way of storing fuel is fat. That's certainly, this is a well-documented effect. And in fact, if you'd like more information, I am happy to share the primary resources to support that. Number 4 is that it really drives, it can really deplete our testosterone levels. So testosterone is not just important for males, we often think of that as a male hormone, but it's actually really important for females as well, for a lot of mechanisms within our hormonal system. And so it can deplete, or at least reduce our ability to produce testosterone, which can have a lot of deleterious effects downstream in our hormonal system. And the last thing is, I mentioned before, and I think this is the most significant thing, is the opportunity cost. So if you're training in that model, again, perhaps there's some short-term benefits that you're seeking, and that it requires time and energy. And so there's an opportunity cost to that time and energy where you're not doing something else. And I would argue that if your goal is simply to be as healthy as possible, then it makes sense to choose the things, the types of activities that are going to give you the best return. Okay, and this is how I look at everything when it comes to my health, is what's going to give me the best return on my time, my energy, and my money. And if we're to just simply consider that question, then there's no doubt that there's better options out there. We know that based on how, at least this is how I interpret the evidence, again, it's based on the logic through this evolutionary lens, is that the best way to create health when it comes to exercise and movement is to satisfy the core requirements of the body. And what we teach, really Move by Design, is the framework that I would teach that reflects these core requirements for movement. And there's really, I think, 4 key things. That's if we keep it fundamental. There's mobility. We need to have adequate movement of all the joints. There's actually an expected amount of movement of every joint in your body. And we need to maintain that throughout our life. The second thing is lifting heavy. We know that lifting heavy provides a majorly important, I would argue, an essential stimulus to the body, really important for the development and maintenance of your muscular system, your skeletal systems of the bones. They respond very favorably to weight training. In fact, I've racked my brain, and I challenge any of you to come up with any negative consequences to being stronger, right? And the only way you can get stronger is to lift heavy things. So that's the second requirement, is lift heavy. The third one is to move fast. As humans, we are definitely designed to move fast, meaning we're designed to do high intensity over short time periods. This can be reflected in, as little as research has shown, as little as 60 seconds of high intensity activity spread out over, say, 3 20-second all-out sprints can have the same effect as a 45-minute run when you look at your metabolism. And you don't have any of the risks attached to that 45-minute run. So there's some amazing research coming out about the benefits of that short, high-intensity training. We talked a little bit about it last week. And so if you want more information, go back and check out that show. Okay, and the last step is moving slow. And so that is when we can incorporate some stretching, some outdoor activities, some really just some, enjoying playing outside, that kind of stuff. So the 4 steps: be mobile, lift heavy, move fast, move slow. If you're satisfying those requirements regularly, then I think that's the quickest route to creating a really healthy body, one that's strong, fit, mobile, one that's going to last you a lifetime. So what I've done, I wanted to give you guys an easy action step. And so mobility is definitely the most underlooked step. And so I've given you access to our dynamic mobility program. It's just above this. If you click on the link, you'll be able to download that, you'll be able to access the basic mobility video, basic dynamic mobility video. And in that, you'll learn some excellent exercises. I'm the one teaching it. They're very straightforward, really easy. So if you haven't been doing a lot of exercise, it's a great place to start. I will make sure I create the context in that you definitely will not be satisfying all your requirements just by doing this video. So I don't, there's other steps that you would ultimately have to add in, but this is a great place to start. Okay. So with that, I will close. If there's any questions, follow up. I'd love to hear your opinions on if you've experienced, say, Orange Theory or other types of gyms like that. Perhaps you really enjoy those activities I mentioned, and maybe you have a different perspective. So I'd love to hear that. Continue the conversation in the comments section, and we'll be back next week. We're going to be talking all about sleep next week. So join me at 7 o'clock next Thursday. Until then, have a great week.